My understanding is that there's going to be a group of devotees, younger generation devotees, gathering for Bhagavad Gita camp this starting Monday. How long to go for? A week? 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I hope they don't get restless. Okay, 2 weeks, great. And the topic for the Gita camp is chapter 17, so I was asked to speak on chapter 17. And there's already recordings made available for the children, for the Gita camp participants, but this is an adult version. A little bit more extended, and let's see how long it takes. Divisions of Faith is the translation of the chapter, the Prabhupada's translation, and you might be interested to know different acharyas have Sanskrit nomenclature that indicate divisions of faith. Here's one from Baladev Vidyabhusan, Shraddha Traya Vibhaga Yoga. So each of the chapters of Bhagavad Gita end in yoga, this yoga, that yoga, the other yoga. So this is Vibhaga, or divisions of Shraddha, faith. And 3 of them, 3 divisions of faith in 3 categories, according to the modes of nature. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has a different nomenclature. He calls it yoga, but Sattvika Shraddha. Sattvika means mode of goodness. If one who has faith in the mode of goodness and engages in yoga, then there's Sattvika Shraddha yoga, faith in the mode of goodness. And, or an English translation of this title, Action with Faith in Scripture. So that's Sattvika type of faith. Sattvika Shraddha, faith in Scripture. So there's a nice, to start, here's a nice illustration, a Bhagavad Gita illustration up at the top. That's Lord Brahma. And down at the bottom, that's living entities in the mode of darkness. And in between, there's the banyan tree with its branches going up and down and so forth. So the modes of nature lead one from the higher realm to the lower realm and vice versa. And depending upon one's type, the mode of nature with which one is influenced by, there's this middle range and goes up and down. That's what that little message is on the right side. There's stuff in the middle. Divine Dvaniac, because that's another chapter of Bhagavad Gita, different than divisions of faith. So here's an overview of the 5 different parts of Bhagavad Gita chapter 17. It's really simple, and we'll go through them. The first 7 verses indicate the modes of nature determine one's faith. They influence and they even determine one's faith. And then, according to faith, then according to the modes of nature, there's some type of worship. Even for persons that are not followers of the Vedas, let's say someone worships a sports hero, or a political guy, or some contemporary leader, and the people follow the contemporary leader, and that's a kind of worship in one of the modes of nature. So it discusses as foods, according to the modes. Sacrifice, according to the modes. Austerity, according to the three modes. Charity, according to the three modes. And then the conclusion. Om Tat Sat. Om Tat Sat. Om is a bija mantra addressing the Supreme, and Tat is a pronoun meaning that, and the absolute truth is addressed in this way. Om Tat Sat. So that's the 6 sections of chapter 17, and we're going to go through them. Here's how the first verse begins. This is Arjuna asking a question, because most scripture follows the question-answer format. In this case, Krishna is the answering person, and Arjuna is the questioning person. So question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. So the beginning part of chapter 17 is Arjuna wants to know, what's the situation of those who do not follow Scripture, but they follow according to their own imagination? What's that like? Which mode of nature is that like? It's a simple question. Oops, we're going backwards, sorry. And here's a little introduction to the chapter. There are persons who, they study the Vedas, they have faith in the Scripture, they follow the regulations according to Scripture, and those persons are called the Devas. This is just very straightforward definition. And those that don't do that, the Asuras, they ignore the Vedas, they act however they like, capriciously, whimsically, and so forth, without following anything that's Vedic. And they're in the category of another, besides the Devas, they're the Asuras, or the demoniac. So here is a paraphrase that our acharyas have given to help us enter into chapter 17. From the previous chapter 16. You have said in the previous chapter all of this, the divine and demoniac. That's the previous chapter. Now, we're going forward with divine and demoniac. And what's the position of persons who have studied the Vedas but don't follow the Vedas? They have some kind of an idea, more or less, vague probably, but they have some idea, and they don't follow what that's in the Vedas. And there may be different reasons. Maybe they didn't understand what they read or heard. Maybe they find it too difficult. Maybe they're worldly and influenced by popular usage of worship and language and everything. So they don't follow, or just plain lazy. But somehow, the question is, this is framing the question. They do have some outstanding characteristics. They're sincere. They have faith in what they're doing. They have their own rules, but those rules are not mentioned in the Shastra. This is discussed in Bhagavatam, but the preliminary is right here in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 17. Dharmak projita kaitavotra paramo nirmat saranam satam, from the Bhagavatam. Dharma projita kaitava. Kaitava is a strong word. And the way the Prabhupada is translated is cheating. And religion and cheating don't go together. But there are people that have some practice that they have faith in. They follow some procedure, but it's not based in Scripture. So, according to this verse of the Bhagavatam eliminates the Bhagavatam. It makes the proclamation. We're not going to talk about those other things, those other types of worship. So Arjun wants to know what's the position of these people. There's the divine and demoniac. There's suras and asuras, the devas and the asuras. That was previous chapter. And if they ignore the Scripture, but they have some kind of faith and some kind of worship, have they taken shelter of sattva, goodness, or rajas or tamas? And right in the verse, the word aho is indicated that there's these two choices: goodness or the mixture of ignorance and passion. And that's pretty much covers everybody, conditioned souls. So here's second verse. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, he's not wasting any time. He's getting right down to responding. According to the modes of nature acquired by the embodied soul, one's faith can be of three kinds, these three modes. And now hear about this. Here's Srila Prabhupada in a morning walk in Juhu by the beach. Nature can be changed if one associates with a bona fide spiritual master and abides by Shastra. So, case in point, many of the persons who Srila Prabhupada drew from in their previous lives, they were in this other category. They weren't following anything, or they were following faithfully something that was not based in Scripture. So they were conditioned by that particular mode of nature, and without all the varieties, very colorful varieties, but they, by association with sadhu, their nature changed. Prabhupada had this phrase: everyone has their nature, but by association and practice, something else can become your nature or second nature. So there's the conditioned, and then there's cultivation of a higher quality, and that can replace the lower nature. Nature can change. Now here's some technical terms. Swabhava. Swabhava. Swabhava indicates impressions that we are all carrying in this or in many cases a previous life. And because of those impressions that we're carrying, there's a tendency for this or that or the other thing. And, the situations that we are born in, or the kinship and friendship that we make with different persons, often corresponds to that swabhava. For example, the word swabhava is used in multiple places in Bhagavad Gita. Brahma karma swabhavajam, Kshatriya karma swabhavajam, Vaishya karma swabhavajam, Shudra karma swabhavajam. There's action arising from previous association and inclination, swabhava. So here's the statement indicating that virtuous and sinful impressions from previous lives, that's swabhava. And by supposing somebody in this life is a thief, they're a thief. And it can be that they've had association with thieves, and they take on the quality of the thieves because that's their association. Or it can be from previous life, they have a tendency. and then the tendency comes out because there's a tendency. That's this term swabhava. So tendency or nature can change according to association that one keeps. Souls in contact with the three gunas of beginningless prakriti. Now this is Baladev Vidyabhusan's language. Beginningless prakriti means there isn't a point in time when prakriti didn't exist, and then voila, there's prakriti. It may be unmanifest, it may be manifest, but prakriti is an energy of the Supreme that's as eternal as he is. So beginningless prakriti. And then living entities may become implicated in prakriti. And according to prakriti, there's modes of nature, and the living entity that's not within the modes of nature may be influenced by the modes of nature. This mode, that mode, the other mode are mixed. And according to their contact with the modes of nature in prakriti, there's the soul takes birth after birth after birth, beginningless sojourn in different bodies. The faith of these embodied living entities is of three types, according to the modes. Very straightforward, very simple. They do not have spiritual intelligence arising from Scripture. They may have read, they may not have read, but their intelligence is not directed by Scripture, certain class of living entities, which allows them to change that swabhava from lower to higher, etc. Faith born from the Scriptures is different. So if you remember the earlier discussion, the people that this chapter is speaking about is, while they may be a little bit familiar with Scripture or the Vedas, they don't really follow it. And they follow something else that's kind of like whimsical, and this idea, that idea, the other idea. And they may be very firm in their worship, in their practice, in their faith, but it has no foundation, no scriptural foundation. And so it's a nice example, it's like a piece of wood floating on a river. And as a piece of wood is floating on a river, sometimes the waves of the river go up, so the piece of wood goes up. Sometimes the waves of the river go down, so the piece of wood goes down. And sometimes it hits a whirlpool and it goes around and around, and the wood is just being moved by the flow of the waves of the river. And similarly, living entities, birth after birth, influenced by their swabhava, and not having the means to change that swabhava, they're just going for the ride, birth after birth. That's Baladev Vidyabhusan's commentary. Now there are the next topic, because it's divisions of faith point to a certain behavior according to faith, according to the impressions that you have inside and faith that you have in those impressions inside. Then you do things. There's a behavior. And nature, culture, choices, grace, and the rule is, as the modes of nature go down, your choices decrease. As the modes of nature go up, the choices increase. For me, a very simple example from travel in India. It's common in India that an agriculturalist has a cow or two. And generally, in the morning, they take the cow into a pasturing area, and on one end is a little stake that goes into the ground, and on the other end is a rope that goes around their neck. And sometimes the rope is longer. Sometimes the rope is shorter. So if the rope is shorter, they have, once the stake is in the ground, they have a less choice of where they can graze. Or if the rope is longer, they have a wider range, they can make a choice. So the modes of nature also work in that way. The more there's the mode of goodness, the more choice. The more there's mode of ignorance, choices shrink. Because one is impelled by that other mode, and the choices are not so many in comparison. The greater the grace, the greater our capacity to choose. So look at this. We covered 2 verses of chapter 17. Here's verse number 3. According to one's existence under the various modes of nature, one evolves a particular kind of faith. Now, one could say evolves a particular kind of faith that's already intrinsic because of swabhava. I have a tendency for this or that or the other mode of nature. But evolves, it becomes more visible and manifest. So then that's the behavior part. But faith drives the behavior. The living being is said to be of a particular faith according to the modes he has acquired. So Rajas, Tamas, and Sattvas at the top. Now here's a philosophical analysis. We all have some faith because we all have some mode of nature that we're influenced by. And what shapes it, it's choices. Now, is it possible that you can be inclined one way and choose something else? Like, let's say, many of the young American devotees, when they joined the Hare Krishna movement, they were not vegetarian. Now, some had become already vegetarian just by, culture. And people didn't like meat and they didn't like the violence of meat. But that behavior can change based upon faith. Like, be nonviolent. Don't harm other living entities unnecessarily. So this is a common statement. As we live, so we believe. We are nothing but our beliefs. Now, this is one way of looking at a person. They have beliefs, they have the modes of nature, and they're acting. They're making choices. And there's lifestyles and so forth and so on. So here's a little chart. There's beliefs, and there's lifestyle. And lifestyle influences beliefs, and beliefs influences lifestyle. There's an interaction. So a big factor is the association that one has. So if one associates with a person on the higher mode of nature, what to speak of a transcendentalist, then one can be influenced by naturally, very simply, very naturally. Though faith itself is a function of sattva gun, this is a nice understanding. Have faith in anything, and maintaining that faith in anything, whatever that anything might be, there's some strain or element or portion of sattva gun. And then with that fundamental sattva gun, then there's variations according to the modes of nature. Now this is our acharyas explaining this. So swabhava was easy to understand. We have a nature, swabhava. Then there's another phrase, anta karana. What's anta karana? Karana is a cause, and antar means within. Antar karana. So there's this internal propensity, the subtle mind, intelligence, false ego, and memory. That's the antakarana. And we act commonly according to that. And that, the internal, can also change as behaviors can change. In fact, when the antakarna changes, behaviors will change. That's part of having faith. Back to this starting point of this little paragraph. There's some position of sattva-gun, or faith, in goodness. And then one follows that. Supposing, we're going to take the other side of the story, supposing someone has faith, I want to get rich by hook or crook. I want to get rich. I have faith in getting rich and it's going to make me happy. So I'll come up with X, Y, and Z ways, and some of them may be unlawful, like stealing. But, I'll try to steal in such a way that I don't get caught, because if I get caught, then I'm in trouble. I'm in prison. I'm going to be punished. But I may have this propensity to get something by illegal means, just when nobody's looking, or fraud, or something, embezzlement, or when no one's looking. And that's an antakarana. It's a karana, or causation, that's within. And these four parts are where the antakarana resides: mind, intelligence, false ego, and chitta. I may or may not remember. In my previous life, I was a thief. But propensity, the antakarana, is there if in my previous life I was a thief. And an opportunity arises, and nobody's looking. I think nobody's looking. Super Soul is looking, but I think nobody's looking. And so I take the opportunity to steal. And supposing I get away with it, then within God's law, you don't get away with it. But within man's law, you may get away with it. And so you do it again, and do it again, and do it again. So it repeats itself. That's conditioned life. Oops, go forward. The internal organ, that's this antakarana, which is based in regulation, or sattva. It's also impacted by the three modes of nature. And so all living entities, regardless of species, not only human beings, there's modes of nature. So there's animals. Let's take cows. They're animals. They're more in the mode of goodness. Tigers and lions, they're more in the mode of passion. And there's other animals, living entities, that are more in the mode of ignorance. A sloth or something. So modes of nature impact all living entities, not only humans. Now, the faith of the internal organ, again, that is antakarana, a causation that's within, a karana that's within, predominated by sattva-gun, is sattvic. That faith of the internal organ predominated by rajagun is rajasic, etc. And the ordinary person, a worshiper who has an object of worship endowed with one of the three types of faith, and being faithful to one of the three respective types of object, that is, devas, worship of the demigods, that's a type of worship, and yakshas and pretas. What are pretas? Pretas are ghosts. We'll hear some more about the ghosts. That's yakshas, this is a mode of passion. So mode of goodness, mode of passion, mode of ignorance, type of worship, according to the modes. And one has faith in this worship, that worship, the other worship. And so I do this, that, or the other because of having faith. And the faith is, sustained faith is, that's goodness, but the goodness may be, and often is, influenced by the other modes of nature. So this goes back to another chapter in the final third section of the Bhagavad Gita, modes of nature. So what's here in chapter 17 is building on what's already been explained, the three modes of nature chapter. As long as one's faith is not completely purified in purified goodness, that faith is subject to contamination. So we're looking at this alternative. There are some persons that are pure, and those persons that are pure have faith in the Vedas, and they follow what the Vedas say. But there's some persons, they have some idea what's in the Vedas, but they don't follow what the Vedas say. They do their own thing with some consistency, with some faith in what they're doing. Whatever that is, goodness, passion, ignorance. Building skyscrapers, or stealing, or giving in charity. So the modes of nature are acting because I have faith in these things and have a propensity for these things. And so I do these things, and it reinforces that particular modes of nature. It should be understood that if one's heart is in the mode of goodness, his faith is also in the mode of goodness, and similarly passion and ignorance. Thus, we're still in verse number 3, I want to get moving. We find different types of faith in this world, and there are different types of religions due to different types of faith. We certainly find that to be true. The real principle, this is Prabhupada's purport, of religious faith is situated in the mode of pure goodness, but because the heart is tainted, we find different types of religious principles. Thus, according to the different types of faith, different types of worship. So here's a picture. There at the top, that's worship of the devas. In the middle, that's worship of a demon, a worldly fellow. And at the bottom is ghost worship, ghosts and spirits. And some people do that. That's verse number 4. And here's a list. I'm going to go quickly because they're interesting. This is from commentators. There's different kinds of ghosts. A common phrase is bhuta, a ghost. And the ghost, the bhuta, there's a soul, and there's a subtle body without a gross body. That's the standard bhuta. But then there's this other term, preta. There's a soul in the subtle body and a transition body that is grosser than the subtle body and subtler than the gross body. Now, it doesn't detail what that is, but they're entities, they're ghostly entities that one may see. Like, if there's the first kind, bhuta, you don't see them. You may feel their presence, but you don't see them. But there's this other in between, preta, and you may see them. Some persons, you may know some persons who have seen ghosts. There was a little Prabhupada story. At some point in time, John Lennon of the Beatles had purchased an estate. And he had some friendship with the devotees, and he invited the devotees to come stay with him and Prabhupada to come stay with him for a month. And the deal was they would have a morning and evening kirtan and class, and then during the day the devotees would clean up the place because there was overgrown brush and so forth and so on. So the devotees were happy to do that, happy to be with Prabhupada, happy that Prabhupada was giving his association to John Lennon. And in the course of their staying there, it turns out that there was a groundskeeper fellow that stayed in a little cabin, and he was spooked because there was a ghost in his cabin. And the groundskeeper asked the devotees, is there something your spiritual master can do to drive away the ghost? And Prabhupada said, yes, we would just have kirtan, because ghosts won't linger where there's kirtan. So they went, and they had a lengthy, lively, extended kirtan, and the ghost went away. And there's other examples and other examples. The groundskeeper didn't see the ghost, but he felt the presence of the ghost, and he wanted relief. Sometimes, like, there's these stories that the ghost is carrying a candle across the room. You can't see the ghost, but you see the candle moving. And then lays the candle down and doesn't make a sound, but just there's the presence of a ghost. Anyway, there are such things. They're real. And they can be dealt with by higher influence, by spiritual influence. So sometimes living entities, that they may become a preta. And as preta, they're detached from the body because they're taken from the body, but they have some attachment to the body, and so they're given this interim thing, somewhat of a covering, so they're not fully in the next position yet. Anyway, this is details. Some of you are familiar with a teaching of Shankaracharya. And this is Pancha Upasana, or worship of these 5 deities. And his idea is, it doesn't matter which one, you can worship this one, that one, the other one, or combination, because from his point of view, behind the form is the formless. So this form, that form, the other form, you can worship this form, that form, the other form, fine. But please understand that the goal is to become connected to the formless. That's the Pancha Upasana type of worship. So here's the next 2 verses from chapter 17. Those who undergo severe austerities and penances, not recommended in the scriptures, performing them out of pride and egoism, who are impelled by lust and attachment, who are foolish and who torture the material elements of the body as well as the soul dwelling within, are to be known as demons, like, for example, Hiranyakashipu and what he did for a long period of time, undergoing austerities, and an anthill grew up around him, etc., etc. And it caused disturbance in the whole universe. So divine and demoniac was the previous, and there's demoniac tendencies for penances and austerities. And now in this particular verse of chapter 17, it's taking it a step further. Without recognizing the Vedic conclusion, someone may, in case of Hiranyakashipu, he did, underwent severe austerities, very, very severe. And here's Baladev Vidyabhusan commenting. They perform austerities which give pain to others according to their own scriptures, which are contrary to the Vedas, endowed with obstinacy given by me alone to let them accomplish their desires for sense objects. They make the combination of elements, which are basic components of the body, wither away, exactly what Hiranyakashipu did, by means of such things as useless fasting. they also make me wither away by offending me, who am situated within their bodies. They are devoid of discrimination and scriptural knowledge. So there are such persons. And Hiranyakashipu is a classic example. So now there's foods in the modes of nature. This is a dividing verse. Every food, people have preferences for 3 types of food. And they have preferences for certain types of austerities and certain types of charity. So there's a description of these 3. So now we're moving into the foods. In the picture, on the upper right, there's a vegetable market. And in the left, there's butcher shop. And the bottom right, it's a liquor shop. So according to the modes of nature, people like this food or that food. And that's what's discussed in this section. Foods that are dear to those in the mode of goodness increase the duration of life, purify one's existence, and give strength, health, and happiness, and satisfaction. Such foods are juicy, fatty, wholesome, and pleasing to the heart. And so rather than going through all of this, there's rajas and tamasic. Food prepared more than 3 hours before being eaten, food that is tasteless, decomposed, and putrid, food consisting of remnants of and untouchable things, is very dear to those in the mode of darkness. There's a variety of foods in the mode of darkness. Moving along, 3 verses, different types of sacrifice. And when sacrifice in principle means you forgo something to get another something. There's an aspiration to gain something. And that's a type of sacrifice. So you give something of lesser value to get to something of greater value. So there's the mode of goodness, pictured here, fire yagya. That's a type of sacrifice. And the one increases the quality of goodness. But supposing one doesn't follow that standard, then something else. For the sacrifice performed for some material benefit or for the sake of pride, O chief of the Bharatas, you should know to be in the mode of passion. And there's lots of that even within Vedic culture, but aside from Vedic culture, we're speaking about people that they know what's in the Vedas, but they don't follow, and so they have their own thing, and they do their own thing. And that's, as Kali Yuga progresses, it becomes more prevalent. And then there's sacrifice without regard of scripture. This picture in the center. You recognize who that person is in the center? He is going to cut off his head and offer his head in the sacrificial fire. And Lord Shiva says, please stop. You don't have to do that to please me. So there's sacrifice in the mode of ignorance. In the modes of nature, 3 types of sacrifice. We're trying to bring this to a close. Austerity. There's austerity that consists of worship of the Supreme Lord, the Brahmanas, and spiritual master, superiors like the father and mother, in cleanliness, simplicity, celibacy, and nonviolence. So that's austerity in the mode of goodness. And brahmachari life as an example, here's some other places in Bhagavad Gita, a number of other places where it's discussed. It's recommended for all classes of people. And austerity of speech, this is I like this verse, austerity of speech in the mode of goodness. Speaking words that are truthful, pleasing, beneficial, and not agitating to others, and also regularly reciting Vedic scripture. So that's austerity of speech. There's different types of austerities. Now, there's speech that can break relationships or build obstacles to relationships, and there's speech that does the opposite. It breaks down the barriers of relationships. Because of time, I'm not going to go through all of this. This is a nice, detailed explanation of speech, austerity of speech. Sometimes speaking the truth palatably can be a challenge. Like, you have to tell somebody you're heading for the ditch. Now, how do you say that palatably? Because they're heading for the ditch and you're in the car too. It's not easy. And parenting is an example, and so many other types of speaking pleasingly. Speaking the truth pleasingly. Some of you may know there's a whole multi-part seminar that Sri Radhika and her husband have been developing in Naperville, and they just recently, both of them went to Toronto, a 9-day seminar in empathic communication, because communication is important. It builds relationships, but supposing you're not sensitive to your needs or the other person's needs, and you can speak in a way that irritates, it happens. So how do you speak the truth palatably? Like a 9-day seminar. Because it's subtle. Satisfaction, simplicity, gravity, and self-control, purification of one's existence are the austerities of the mind. Satisfaction, simplicity, gravity, self-control, purification of one's existence. Then there's questions. Because of time, there's many more slides, and I'm not going to be able to finish. Where does satisfaction occur? The idea is it's in the heart or in the soul, and because it's in the heart or in the soul, it conveys that satisfaction to the coverings of the soul, the intelligence, the mind, your emotions, and so forth. And like cultivation of higher modes of nature, where there are more choices, this is also a choice that one can make. Focusing on what we have, we can be satisfied, rather than what we don't have. So I'm feeling a little frustrated because there's so much content. I'm just passing over it because of time, so your Gita camp, of course, the audience is going to be children. There's a different audience, but it's nice if they can understand these points in a way that a child can understand these points, and then apply those points and have nice relationships with one another, with their family members and with others outside their family and their friends and so forth. Okay, another verse, 17:17. Threefold austerity, performed with transcendental faith by men who are not expecting material benefits but are engaged only for the sake of the Supreme. This is austerity and goodness. Now, the upper picture is Prabhupada in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. And down below is Jamuna singing and George Harrison singing along with whoever else is in this picture. And it's an elevating practice. One who engages in this kind of austerity, it becomes not an austerity, it becomes a pleasure. But some persons like austerities that are pleasurable for them, and to other people it's painful or uncomfortable. Or how can you sit and chant like this painting, these two paintings or photographs are showing? Penance, here's the modes of nature, performed out of pride and for the sake of gaining respect, honor, and worship, is said to be in the mode of passion. It is neither stable nor permanent. So on the upper right, that's Daksha, honoring himself and criticizing his son-in-law. And so badly was he criticizing his son-in-law that his own daughter gave up her body. Sati gave up her body because she didn't want to have any connection with this offensive person, her father. She gave up her body. And yesterday evening we had this little discussion about Ekalavya, the lower right, worshipping not in a transcendental way, not with submission to Guru, but apparently with submission to Guru by building or constructing a murti of Dronacharya and learning that way. So this is not in mode of goodness, etc. Penance performed out of foolishness with self-torture or to destroy and injure others is said to be in the mode of ignorance. Now my understanding of what's at the top, that's Hiranyakashipu, and at the bottom it's one of the things that people do sometimes, walking on hot coals. It's like torturing their feet. But they want to demonstrate that when their concentration becomes so great, their feet aren't burned, unless their feet are burned. Fire walk, they call it. Mode of ignorance. Charity, we all understand what charity is. There's mode of goodness, mode of passion, mode of ignorance. And then conclusion. Here's these few verses. Here's how chapter 17, verse 23 begins. Om Tat Sat. From the beginning of creation, the three words Om Tat Sat were used to indicate the supreme absolute truth. These three symbolic representations were used by Brahmanas while chanting the hymns of the Vedas and during sacrifices for the satisfaction of the Supreme. From the beginning of the creation, the three words Om Tat Sat were used to indicate the supreme absolute truth. These three symbolic representations were used by Brahmanas. We read this. So more description of the Om Tat Sat mantra. And very detailed discussion. It's interesting, but I'm going to skip it. It's by Palatine Vidyabhusan. And next verse, therefore, transcendentalists undertaking performances of sacrifice, charity, and penance in accordance with scriptural regulations begin always with Om to attain the Supreme. So there's Dhruva doing his austerities, but Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, that was his mantra, but beginning with Om. That's nearly completing the chapter, and I think I'm going to abruptly halt because of time. That's just a little. Here's a nice verse that summarizes everything. Oops. Here's Baladev Vidyabhusan's summary. Rejecting faith arising from one's impressions, the person who takes shelter of faith arising from Scripture becomes qualified for the highest goal. This is the ordinance of the 17th chapter. So by the principle is in contrast to the modes of nature where there's this, that, and the other type of faith in the modes of nature, there's transcendental faith. And the transcendental faith takes one to the transcendence, or to the supreme. That the Vedas take you there. And the sincere follower, following the Vedas, gradually, or more directly, can attain that ultimate position. And in between, there's many steps. And the main part of this chapter is persons who they have read the Vedas, but they don't follow them. They have a faith that's their own faith, their own practice, their own this and that, and they attain something temporary and limited of this world. And then there's the transcendental. And that's the advocacy of 17th chapter. With the various steps in between. Because that's the question Arjuna has asked. What about those people that don't follow the Vedas? Do they have, what's their position in the modes of nature? So that's the topic. Now I hope the children that attend the Gita camp are going to be able to understand some portion of all this. I'm sure the teachers will try to keep it really simple. Let's see if there's some discussion. Yeah.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Thank you for the class and coming here. I have a few questions, but I'll just start with one and then maybe later if we have time. So, in my understanding, you talked about the example of Brikasura. Was about to sacrifice his own head in whatever. So, one understanding that I have is that, not on a gross level, but on a subtle level, if I ignore parts of myself and try to achieve something that way, my understanding is that is also in the mode of ignorance, because I'm trying to ignore that part, and I would rather be aware of those quote-unquote bad parts of myself and just be aware that they are there and go from there. So that is my understanding. Any thoughts on that, Guru Maharaj?
Well, there's two choices, at least. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, what good will repression accomplish? Which is kind of what you're saying.
Sort of. Not exactly. I just want
there's a tendency, and I deny that tendency and act otherwise, that's not honesty.
Mm-hmm.
So that's repressing a tendency, that's not elevating. But it's a choice. I can choose that there's another option rather than I have a tendency And I recognize I have a tendency, but I can choose to not follow that tendency. Let's take, because it was very common during the early days of the Hare Krishna movement that Prabhupada attracted young people that had bad habits just because of the culture that they grew up in. This and that and the other, without naming. And so they had a habit because of the culture in which they grew up. And he didn't demand, initially, but when for purification purposes, at a certain point in time, making a commitment to not indulge in those Rajagun, Tamagun tendencies, like a vow. I won't. Now, the vow has a flip side. If the vow is, let me go for higher consciousness, and because of that going for higher consciousness, then avoiding the lower consciousness influences that are tendencies that may have been within me, I'm protected because of that vow or that bhakti disposition. I'm protected by bhakti. And so it may still be lingering, whatever that lingering may be, or the 4 regular principles, for example. There may be some lingering, but it's okay because I understand these are important principles. So I'm making a choice to not just take my baggage along with me. And remain conditioned by the baggage. But leave it to the side and take up at least, in principle, something that's higher consciousness related or conducive to higher consciousness. And that's another option. Besides accepting, I have a tendency that's somewhere down there in the lower modes of nature, and I don't want to deny it. There's this tendency.
So I think I want to, thank you for the perspective. So I want to then basically make my choice for attaining a higher goal, aware of those lower tendencies.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj.
Facial tissue.
Thank you for the class. So I wanted to start with a reflection and then a question. So I really like the teaching where how the contaminated modes of nature, they expand into the heart, and then based on the position of our heart, our faith, our behaviors and lifestyle and so on, it all gets influenced. And, also really liked how to understand how the modes of material nature together with our antakaran, the internal organ, kind of how it works to keep us on this cycle of samsara. And I think these teachings give a lot of opportunity for introspection to understand our own position and give some clarity on how the world is behaving, and it's really nice teachings. And ultimately I really liked how, because most of us are quarrelsome, lazy and misguided, so unless we have that somehow or the other, we have that opportunity to associate with the devotees and the grace of the spiritual master, and also taking to the scriptures, that's like the only way to kind of elevate ourselves beyond this lower modes. So it's like almost like we are condemned unless we have this association of the devotees and the scriptures. This was my reflection. I'm not sure if it makes sense. But yeah, yeah. And my question would be regarding how you mentioned that the higher you go in the modes of nature, the more choices you obtain. So, are these choices in relation to Krishna, or are they other choices? And what kind of? And it also mentioned that if you receive the grace, then you get more choices as well. So, is this referring? What type of grace is this? Is this referring to the
What's
grace?
the second option?
So basically, the slide mentioned that the higher you go in the modes of nature and the more grace you receive, the more choices you get. So are these choices in relation with Krishna, and what type of grace is this referring to?
What type of grace? That was the second question.
Yes.
Well, my answer to this question is it depends. Because mode of goodness people may not be Vaishnava. Mode of goodness people may be Vaishnava. So those who are Vaishnavas in relation to Krishna, but they're mode of goodness people that are not Vaishnavas. They're charitable, this and that and the other thing and the other thing. They do good works and they open hospitals and feed people and, do good things. But it's not Krishna-centered. So it depends. Now to stay, then there has to be a center. There has to be a place of shelter beyond the modes, because the modes are always moving and competing for supremacy. So there's the answer to the first question. Does it mean more choices in relation to serving Krishna? Not necessarily. And then the second question is, what does grace mean? It's similar, but it's a little different because it's a different terminology. It's something descending. Grace, another word for grace is mercy. One may be the recipient of mercy. and mercy can look differently for different people. Supposing, for example, someone's greedy, they get what they want, that's grace, as far as they're concerned. They win the lottery or something. So, but that's the modes of nature and very entangling. And who knows how they're going to utilize that lottery money. It can very easily destroy their life. Unintentionally, but that happens. So grace can mean different things to different people. For the transcendentalist, the grace means, as you've been trained and you've understood, it means access to devotional service. Because through the medium of devotional service, I get access to the Supreme Person. That's what really what grace is. But there may be steps that lead in that direction or not. Depends on the conception of life. What grace means. Shweta, you had some question.
Hare Krishna. I'm thinking about this impressions which are so strong within us, and they often get intertwined with while being in this mixed devotional service, there is a chance of often getting my impressions intertwined by by scriptural faith from scriptures and Guru Sadhana Shastra, and I'm trying to understand how important it is to untwine those impressions in our path and understand for ourselves that this is from impressions from the past. Am I being clear? I am not sure.
Do you know some people? I know some people driven by this life and or previous lives' misfortune. And then when something comes near that misfortune, they get triggered. And it's not necessarily have anything to do with reality. It's just there's this sensitivity due to some past misfortune in this life and or previous lives. And, they're ruled when the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. That's it. Is it possible? But yes, by training and by experience and by wisdom, it's possible to go on the other side of that conditioning or that tendency or that trigger. But it takes some care and some skill and cultivation so that one can not be ruled by that past. Okay. You have something more.
Yes, Maharaj. And I'm trying to understand, is it in everybody's life that needs to happen, or it depends on the individual?
Well, we all have past, without exception. And whether it does get resolved, the past trauma, let's call it, trauma healing, you're familiar with that term. Whether we go down that path of trauma healing or not is going to determine whether we are continuing to be ruled by the trauma of the past. And then someone that's skilled in helping overcome. Now, some persons don't have that so strongly. Some persons have it very strongly. And they're helpless. The emotion gets triggered and there they go. Let's see if there's someone else. Anybody else? Our silent majority back there in the balcony seats. Okay, go ahead, take it away.
I guess this is more of my understanding again. The faith in scriptures, it really implies that a person was there to impart that faith in the scripture. And the faith in the scriptures that is mentioned here in Bhagavad Gita is really not the one that you obtain just by reading the scripture on my own. That is my understanding. Basically, it's personal. It comes from a person. The faith in the scripture comes from a person rather than it being impersonal. So
that's correct. But supposing one is in a remote place, is it possible that their faith can grow by reading a book? Absolutely. Because it's coming from a person.
Right. Good point. Yeah.
It's a supreme person and the representative of the supreme person, provided they're, a transparent representative of the supreme person. And then one gets that personal association through the written word. And it happens. It happens. Okay.